Organization of your Azure resources is much more than just being neat and tidy. Good organization helps you secure, manage, and track the costs of your Azure environment. My name is Eric Boyd. I am an Azure MVP, a Microsoft Regional Director, and the founder of ResponsiveX, where we help customers run workloads and develop applications in Azure. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can organize your Azure environment. I will explain the hierarchical strategies and show you how to organize resources using tags. Now, there are several organizational approaches you can take, so you will have to choose the approach that works best for your requirements and organization. When you create Azure resources, they get created in resource groups. Resource groups are simply collections of Azure resources. You can think of them like a folder or a directory. You can create a directory on your computer, add various types of files to it, name it whatever you would like, and limit who has access to it. Azure resource groups are similar. You can create multiple resource groups in your Azure subscription. You can add multiple and different types of Azure resources to a resource group, name it whatever you would like, and manage permissions to limit access to the resource group and its resources. You can also create multiple Azure subscriptions to segment workloads and applications and create another level of hierarchy in your resource organization. Multiple subscriptions can be managed and governed using management groups. You can define your management group structure and associate an Azure subscription to a group in your hierarchy. Then management tools like Azure Policy and role-based access control can flow down and be applied to your subscriptions. To learn more about organizing your resources and subscriptions, you will find additional guidance in this decision guide in the Cloud Adoption Framework. Sometimes hierarchies aren't the best organizational tool. And within a hierarchy, sometimes you need to be able to segment and filter resources. This is where tagging comes to the rescue. In Azure, you can apply tags to resources, resource groups, and subscriptions, which give you a way to organize your Azure environment into a taxonomy alongside the hierarchical organization you get with resource groups. Tags are simply name value pairs, and you can use them to add your own metadata to a resource. You can then search for resources by the tags you've created and their values. For example, you could use a tag to label a resource's environment with values like development, test, or production. You could associate a department or a cost center to a resource using a tag. You could also use a tag to indicate that a resource doesn't belong to a specific cost center, but is instead a shared resource. To learn more about naming and tagging your resources, you can find additional guidance in this decision guide in the Cloud Adoption Framework. I will now browse to the Azure portal and quickly show you how you can organize your resources. I'm going to browse my resource groups, and you might notice they are named in a consistent way. It's important for me to follow a consistent convention for naming, and a convention that provides identifying information for each resource at a glance. I typically like to structure the naming convention to include tokens that represent the resource type, the workload or the application, the environment, and the Azure region. Lastly, I append an incrementing numerical value or a unique token in scenarios where I have the potential of having multiples. Now, I prefer to delimit resource names with a hyphen where possible, but not all resource names can support hyphens. For example, storage accounts don't allow hyphens, uppercase, letters, and several other characters. And you need to be aware of constraints on the length of resource names. For example, virtual machine names can only have 15 characters. So for certain resources, you might deviate from your standard naming convention. But at a minimum, I recommend you are consistent with how you structure the names of all of the resources of a given type. Notice I didn't prescribe the exact order of the items to include in the names of your resources, because it's often a personal preference based on your environment, how you want to work with these resources, and how you'd like to see them sorted. Now, I commonly structure the names with a resource type, a workload or application, a region, an environment, a counter, but you'll find variations out there. However, I wouldn't encourage you to attempt to encode all the descriptive information about a resource into the resource name. This is where tags help. While the name is useful in uniquely identifying the resource, and naming conventions help you visually identify resources in your subscription, they aren't easy to search without parsing resource names. However, tags are searchable. You'll see that the information encoded in my naming convention is also expressed as tags, because I can easily search and group resources using the tags. I can also add additional information into the tags without being overly concerned by the resource name limits on size or allowed characters. Now, in my tags, you'll see additional information associated with a resource, as well as the information included in the names of the resources as shown here. And when I browse my resources, I can add filters on properties of the resource, including the resources tags. In addition to using tags to filter and locate resources across your Azure environment, you can use tags to group and report on resources. One of the most common reasons Azure customers want reporting like this is for managing usage and costs. In the Manage Costs and Avoid Overspending video of this series, I show you how you can use Azure Cost Management to report on your usage and costs. In addition to grouping and limiting permissions on resources, resource groups also represent a deployable unit. When deploying resources using Azure Resource Manager and Bicep templates, you are deploying a resource group of resources. As you think about how you organize your resources into resource groups, you should also consider how you will manage the lifecycle and deployment of your resources. In the next video of this series, I will provide an overview of the Azure global infrastructure and help you determine which regions are best for your workloads. Before I wrap up, I'd like to invite you to join me at our weekly Azure live Q&A session. During the 30-minute session, I will host an interactive and live Q&A to answer your Azure questions.